Time magazine has published an article detailing how an extensive network of powerful and wealthy people ran an, as the magazine calls it, shadow campaign in order to, as they say, save the US election of 2020, with which they seem to mean to influence the election process so that the result will be more akin to their liking, that is, preventing sitting Republican President Donald Trump to remain in office and installing Democrat Joe Biden instead, although this network claims otherwise, as we will see. Nevertheless, now the members of this shadow campaign seemingly want credit for their actions, for this scenario is not just a theory made up by the article's author. The people involved in this operation are proud enough to reveal themselves and readily give the information how this undertaking was carried out. The column authored by Molly Ball lays out a scheme involving a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies, working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. Unironically, they call the group organizing this event a cabal, which is another word for conspiracy. The entities that operated this so-called cabal want the secret history of the 2020 election told, even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream, the column reads. Funnily enough, this language comes from the same people that would deride every critical opinion originating from pro-Trump circles who are questioning the process or outcome of the election of 2020 as a conspiracy theorist, which in the context now will appear as a derogatory term reserved for those fringe elements of society who, in their critics' opinion, are peddling false or unconfirmed and outrageous claims about certain events. Let's not forget, Time magazine is not some tiny and unknown unorthodox or alternative paper, but publicly recognized to be trustworthy and at the heart of the journalistic mainstream within the US and beyond. But nevertheless, it seems to spread one of those so-called conspiracies, or in their words, cabals, that claim a rigged election. It thus seems conspiracies or cabals, as Time calls them euphemistically or deceivingly, are only true or good if the right side proclaims and supports them. That right side, of course, is that of which the author is in favor of. The piece in the magazine notes that former President Donald Trump had observed a shift in behavior in corporate America, even as he sought to challenge the results of the 2020 election. It was all very, very strange, Time quotes Trump as saying in early December. Within days after the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. The magazine observes, in a way, Trump was right. Ball writes, there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the US Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO, i.e. America's largest federation of unions, published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's, as Time magazine hyperbolically calls it, assault on democracy, end quote. The piece of Arthur Ball, however, notes at several points throughout that the shadowy cabal was only working to protect the integrity of the 2020 election, not sway the results or prevent Trump from winning. Quote, "The handshake between business and labor was just one component in a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. An extraordinary shadow effort dedicated not to winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free and fair, credible and uncorrupted." Another quote reads, "The scenario the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all, a failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that has been a hallmark of America since its founding." End quote. She claims further that Donald Trump himself was on a quote, "campaign to spoil the election" by quote, "insisting that mail ballots were a democratic plot and the election would be rigged, while his quote, "henchmen at the state level sought to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote," further claiming that he was trying, quote, "to steal the election via plotting to block a, as Time frames it, legitimate vote count. Of course, from Trump's perspective, it was not legitimate, or he would not have been contesting it, but that doesn't matter, for only the Time author's interpretation of events is honest, true and good. Her opposition are only, in her own words, thieves and henchmen, conspiracy theorists. Again, that dirty word that means the same as cabal, although more refined, but also more deceptive. Yet cabals are the good guys, remember, for cabals come from the verbally gifted, the enlightened elites, and conspiracies only from the hoi polloi. Further, opposition to Ball's version of the election are plotters who are stealing an election they fairly lost, though in Trump's and his supporters' opinion, the outcome of a loss wasn't that clear at all. Thus, the lawsuits and counter-arguments towards the ruling class via the rule of law and their freedom of speech, something perfectly natural in a supposed liberal democracy. But they are the bad guys because they are questioning the ruling class's favorite result, the class comprising the mentioned cabal. For the author, it's not Trump and company who, in their mind, are trying to save an election from fraud. It's their political counterparts, the cabal, supported by Time's own Molly Ball. A cabal whose members were also, by the way, as they and their fans gladly reveal, plotting to influence an election process they also deemed to be rigged, but this time by Trump. The cabal is projecting their own actual doing on Donald Trump in an astonishing act of cognitive dissonance. But what is the truth? At best, both parties in this conflict are Machiavellian plotters. At worst, only one side. And which side it is will for most people depend on their ideological position in this culture war. Whatever will be the case. Certainly, however, one has to be alarmed at the notion that a cabal of well-funded individuals was working behind the scenes to steer media coverage and control the flow of information, right? At least if this cabal is successful in influencing the population to do as they bid them to. And do we have evidence for that? A study conducted by the Media Research Center, in short MRC, suggests slanted media coverage may have tilted the election in favor of President Joe Biden. The MRC surveyed 1,750 Biden voters in 7 swing states, 6 of which were called for Biden, were tested if these voters had knowledge of 8 news stories. It was found that a huge majority, 82%, of Biden voters were unaware of at least one of these key items, with 5% saying they were unaware of all 8 of the issues tested. This lack of information proved crucial. 1 of every 6 Biden voters surveyed, 17%, said they would have abandoned the Democratic candidate had they known the facts about one or more of these news stories. A shift of this magnitude would have changed the outcome in all 6 of the swing states won by Joe Biden, and Donald Trump would have comfortably won a second term as president. The president would have trounced Biden in the Electoral College 311 to 227. So, why did these voters not know about these issues? A media withholding information or spinning it via ideologically laden interpretation during the presidential election of 2020 revealed itself in another study, which, in my opinion, lays the groundwork for the previously presented one. The news coverage of both candidates during the election was heavily slanted towards only one of them. Do you guess who it was? Analyzing all the coverage on both candidates on ABC, CBS, and NBC evening newscasts right before the election in November showed following results. Trump received 839 minutes of coverage, compared to just 269 minutes of airtime for Biden, a 3-to-1 disparity. Even more lopsided, the analysts found 10 times more evaluative statements about Trump than Biden. 890 comments about the president, of which 822, 92.4%, were negative, versus 68, 7.6%, that were positive. Note that these totals do not include statements about the candidate's prospects in the race, i.e. standing in the polls, chances to win, etc., nor does it include partisan statements from the candidates or their surrogates. Contrast this to Biden, who benefited from 60 positive statements versus only 31 that were negative, adding up to a positive press score of 66%. The column from Time further references a little-known effort by a veteran progressive operative to combat disinformation on social media platforms. In November 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his home, where they warned him about the danger of the election-related falsehoods that were already spreading unchecked. Vanita Gupta, who later became Associate Attorney General within the Biden administration, also attended the Zuckerberg dinner and met with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey as well. Gupta conveyed the pressure those in attendance placed on the big tech titan. It took pushing, urging, conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get to a place where we ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcement, she said, as quoted by the article. The result? Both platforms stepped up by censoring and removing posts about a New York Post article involving emails found on Hunter Biden's, President Biden's son's, laptop, which appeared to discuss shady business dealings with foreign entities using his father's influence as vice president at the time. Considering all previously presented information. This was, in my estimation, a calculated and deliberate move to censor a story detrimental to one presidential candidate, and Twitter's Jack Dorsey later admitted to be an act that was wrong to do so. That admission came in the form of testimony before the Senate after the election. No matter of how much of this laptop story will be revealed to be true, and according to investigations by the Washington Post to examine the authenticity of the emails, there did not surface conclusive evidence of criminal activity on those mails confirmed to be authentic, while other investigators suspect tampering with the emails that were found. How much credibility you will bestow on the reigning elite investigating its own members is up to you. Yet I only will reference my other videos that detail and prove a huge bias towards left-wing and anti-Trump ideology within the ruling class of both big tech, the media, and the university system. Whatever might be the truth, Twitter and Facebook's action was an open act of censorship that only targeted one candidate. Also, after the election, Facebook and Twitter would both ban Donald Trump, then still the sitting president of the United States of America, when he attempted to convince the public about an alleged election fraud targeted at him. The cabal's influence extended far beyond the control of information via the media in Silicon Valley, as already hinted at. There was a concerted and broad sweeping effort that involved many entities working in tandem. Their work touched every aspect of the election, time rights, ticking off a list of examples. Besides successfully pressuring, quote, social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and used data-driven strategies to fight viral smears, or so the author terms information and opinions dissenting from his own. And using data-driven strategies to fight viral smears, or so the author terms information and opinions dissenting from his own. They also, quote, got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding, fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time, and, quote, executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. End quote. Now, the author herself spreads misinformation on her opponent's actions, interpreting them without evidence as voter suppression, and smears him with the derogatory phrase conspiracy. But her heroes, the cabal, which means the same as the former, and its methods, objectives and views, are not questioned at all. At the heart of this cabal, however, was a man by the name of Mike Podhorzer, the architect of this enterprise, who openly lifts the veil from the secret plan that might have turned the election of 2020. For nearly a quarter century, Podhorzer, senior advisor to the president of the aforementioned AFL-CIO, has, quote, marshaled the latest tactics and data to help its favorite candidates win elections. Among Democratic insiders, he's known as the wizard behind some of the biggest advances in political technology in recent decades and, quote, led to the creation of the Analyst Institute, a secretive firm that applies scientific methods to political campaigns. Podhorzer noted in preparation to the 2020 election, whose results he feared, quote, "We are not prepared for the two most likely outcomes, Trump losing and refusing to concede, and Trump winning the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote by corrupting the voting process in key states." End quote. The article continues. It turned out Podhorzer wasn't the only one thinking in these terms. He began to hear from others eager to join forces. The Fight Back Table, a coalition of resistance organizations, had begun scenario planning around the potential for a contested election, gathering liberal activists at the local and national level into what they called the Democracy Defense Coalition. It wasn't hard to find liberals who saw Trump as a dangerous dictator, but Podhorzer was careful to steer clear of hysteria. What he wanted to know was not how American democracy was dying, but how it might be kept alive, end quote. So he wanted to avoid hysteria, but claims that American democracy is in the wake of dying. Another interesting cognitive dissonance of the author as well as Podhorzer. Time magazine continues. Podhorzer began working holding back-to-back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network of contacts across the progressive universe. The labor movement, the institutional left like Planned Parenthood and Greenpeace, resistance groups like Indivisible and Move On, progressive data geeks and strategists, representatives of donors and foundations, state-level grassroots organizers, racial justice activists and others. The invitation-only gatherings soon attracted hundreds, creating a rare shared base of knowledge for the fractious progressive movement. The meetings became the galactic center for a constellation of operatives across the left who shared overlapping goals but didn't usually work in concert. As 2020 progressed, it stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses. It drew energy from the summer's racial justice protests, many of whose leaders were a key part of the Liberal Alliance, and eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump-skeptical Republicans. And here we have it. This alliance was instrumental in executing the measures introduced above, changing laws, spreading propaganda, censoring media, you name it. The stunning Time report is truly eye-opening, and the level of coordination, money and influence involved will come as a shock to many. It also reveals the fundamental similarity between big business and social justice activists, between capitalists and their opponents. But no wonder, they all attended the same universities and thus came from the same affluent background and endured the same indoctrination. This whole affair might have been an exception for coordinated efforts of many individuals and organizations, opposing or otherwise, albeit in a ruling class that shares the same fundamental education, wealth and lifestyle, regardless of party or area of influence, are rarely contemplated to be created and implemented, not even mentioning to succeed, for they are very difficult to organize or to keep them as a secret. Yet in the winter of 2020, it seemed to have happened, and a cabal, or in other words, a conspiracy of powerful people, as Time magazine names it themselves, triumphed in their goals, whatever they may have been officially, in the minds of the schemers, so-called election integrity, or in the estimation of others, just the gutting of their perceived political foe. In most cases, an endeavor of such a scale is not even necessary, for most elite members across all institutional areas already are pulling into the same general ideological direction, as I have proven in previous videos, without the obligation to consciously labor together, or even to know each other, for they already think and thus act similarly. Still, the enemy, whose spirit possesses the greatest part of the ruling elites and their this and other, conscious or unconsciously designed or converged, cabals, is sly and determined, and even more dangerously, unscrupulous, for he is not even knowledgeable about the hypocrisy of his actions, the evilness of his ambitions, which he deems to be good, and the limitless pride in his ideas that generates the evil at the root of his general worldview. He instructs to his prey the dehumanization they willingly and joyfully inflict on their imagined adversaries. He fashions in them the boundless hatred against the limits of human existence, its eternal rules that they then want to overcome by destroying the very foundations that hold the world together, be it the limits of body that originate our society by being built around them, like our sexual dimorphism, our need for food and drink, or be it the limits of our mind, the passions that have to be guided by love and reason, by faith in a moral order, to not be let loose like mad dogs, or be numbed like a walking dead. But as the reign of the forces of destruction prolongs, it will wane and disappear, even temporarily in its self-inflicted doom, by cutting the line that holds them afloat, which in turn will nourish a new beginning that starts the circle of birth and happiness, of corruption and rebirth anew. Or finally, in the victory of the everlasting King. Still, everyone has to do his part, in great ways or small, to spread and enhance the good, participating in God's plan for salvation, even if it seems to be pointless or insignificant. But it is the smallest of things that will change the world. Everything positive always began with the decision of one man to do right. What will remain is the certain hope in the immaculate heart and soul of the good to triumph, for evil cannot create and sustain, but only twist and ruin, including itself.
Why are there people like Frank? Why is there so much trouble in this world?
I don't know. I had a dream. In fact, it was the night I met you. In the dream, there was our world, and the world was dark because there weren't any robins, and the robins represented love. And for the longest time, there was just this darkness, and all of a sudden, thousands of robins were set free, and they flew down and brought this blinding light of love. And it seemed like that love would be the only thing that would make any difference. And it did. So I guess it means there is trouble till the robins come.
You're a neat girl.
So are you. You're a neat guy.